us who've worked in traditional, or in New Guinea, all of us who've worked in traditional societies are struck by the precocity of the children in the traditional societies, by their creativity, by their comfort in making their own decisions already at 5 and 10 years old. What our children are losing is the confidence to make their own decisions. These 10-year-old New Guinea kids can out-negotiate a European lawyer who comes in there. So what our kids lose is self-confidence, no ability to make their own decisions. There's no teenagers. And their bodies are the bodies of adults. Their mentality is not the mentality of adults. Our kids go through teenage crises where I've never seen a New Guinea kid or an African kid go through teenage.
If a demiurge creates a universe, there is only objectivity, no exclusions. Everything has a purpose. There is no disassociating a loud and unified field theory.
In traditional societies in general, whether they're in Africa.
Even if it's not in our lifetime, the things that tortured us, had to torture us, and the thing that no one has done, I'm sure you've noticed synchronicity. This is the great simulator, and we are the crux of a loophole in understanding what we are and where we are going. And if you don't believe this, and even if I am full of shit about everything, you cannot see it. As you succumb to this practice that the Jews could not do, is do what Jesus said to, and love everything. It reveals itself in the most bizarre ways. It is the romantic movement, and people recognize what ambition.
Children in general are given much more independence and responsibility for their decisions from a very young age. It goes to an extreme. The baby is expected to take responsibility for figuring out not to roll into a fire. Babies playing near fires.
Do not prognosticate much. But this time, I will. I must. But the philosophy will be, because everything has torture and hypocrisy, we are everything. And if it's not, someone will fix it. Of course we are not perfect. This is what comes next.
Well, we're glad.
And I know no one can tell me I am not helping them. This gives me unlimited power, in a world where people have been stifled, so that someone and money is kept from could them. Finally do
Pointed
this.
To her own 7-year-old I know what my daughter is going to do when she grows up. My daughter, I want her to become an economist and go to Harvard. Well, in New Guinea, that's unthinkable. A child makes his or her own decisions. So in our case, we let our kids.
Not because it is easy, but because it is hard. I've experienced this before and I recognize it now. This is why I'm adamant about moving forward with you.
Society. I mean, by the way, I think there are a lot of people here that have 5 to 10-year-olds whom they have to. But by micromanaging our children, being too concerned about their choices, what do you think we're losing?
Lost his interest in snakes, but eventually when he graduated college, 2 months after graduating, he called us up and said, I've decided I'm going to become a chef, and I'm entering culinary school tomorrow. This is a boy who grew up making his own decisions and not being told by his parents what he's going to do.
From yourself. You are limitless. But you don't really know it. It's a hard thing to teach. I can show you the door. You must enter alone.
How do you think this came to be in our society? Was it always like this? I kind of seem to remember that when I was growing up, I perhaps had a bit more freedom than I give to my own child, that children were allowed to kind of go a bit further in the past, do their own thing. And now 30, 40 years, we become more nervous about our children, more concerned about them.
Project everywhere. Project nowhere. There is a meaninglessness that is sacred within us all.
Interesting question, and I don't fully understand the answer to it. Part of it is that in modern industrial society, we have formal education. There's a lot that a kid has to learn in order to be able to get a job and to cope with society. So a kid can't run around and do whatever the kid wants. The kid goes through school, and there are things that you learn at school, and that's necessary in order.
But in morality, everything I do is in my awareness. No one surprises me anymore. But sometimes I get tired. Lol. I am pure with the things I say to you, regardless of the delinquency and occasional miscommunication. I don't have any reason not to be.
So we have to strike a balance between marching children through what they have to learn, but at the same time
How do
giving
you
them
figure
as much
I'm on the
freedom
run?
as possible.
You can't feel what I mean. You will run what I say across your Rolodex on many occasions.
Next day,
this
but
one.
you know, you've got to start giving in order to get some of those responsible choices, people growing up, I guess.
I must say,
That's what the
I
word
was,
subliminal entails. I'm afraid. People love people who teach them who they are.
there is
They
no
have no
alternative
choice but
except
to.
to abandon the elderly when you move camp because you can't carry them plus the children, or to encourage the elderly to commit suicide, or to stop feeding them, or in the worst case, to kill them against
Part
their
of the
will.
brain speaks and the other obeys. I am compliant. But I am also anti-authority. You are the same. But a little less compliant sometimes. This will not change you.
We
I
don't
won't dare.
have these lifelong relationships that one has in a traditional society. And that's why friends of mine say who've worked in Africa sum it up by contrasting Africa with the first world and saying life in Africa is materially poorer, but it's socially richer.
And part of that richness is due to the experience of the older people there that are the repositories of knowledge.
The older people have a more satisfying life. And yes, they're a repository of knowledge in two senses. One is that the first writing in human history wasn't until
It's like two
3400
eyeballs
BC. And
on my own
even
life.
within the last few
And
centuries,
am having a seizure. I don't understand what you mean. The phone,
41
bank
button remote on
relationship.
the television, which I cannot do. But on the other hand, by the time you're 76, you've seen lots of stuff, you've got lifelong experience, you've seen more of human relations, you've got your own ego out of the way in advising other people, you've had much more experience at supervising and administering. So older people
Like
in our
I use the
society
camera, but I
have
do not know how
unique
to care
values,
about a
unique roles
phone.
to play that
I will
younger people
never
just are not
pay a
competent
phone
to play.
bill. Ever.
I suppose
In
the
fact,
kind of
all bills.
disrespecting
I am like,
of the
really?
elderly kind of gained momentum with the baby boomers. You know, it was our generation that kind of developed the cult of youth, and as we're kind of getting a bit older ourselves, we're developing
Crazy,
the cult of the
like,
middle-aged and
allergic
the elderly. And
to pieces
so
of
perhaps,
paper
you know, what you're
that
saying will
think
start to
they own
come
me.
back naturally.
Mortally offended. In fact, I go ape. But
And
I love
and
court.
Before we kind of go on to talk about possible solutions and how we can kind of deal with this, you made some interesting observations about their legal system.
Yeah, there are basic differences
But
between
I hate banks.
the
I
legal
am
system
just
under state
finding
governments
all this out.
and the system of justice. One would not call it a legal system. The system of justice in traditional societies. Traditional societies do have a system of justice, do have systems of justice. People have disputes. The disputes have to be settled. There are things that are considered crimes. The crimes have to be dealt with. Our modern industrial societies, where there are thousands of people.
Just go there. And have done the fucker's job already and boss him around. Like you own a
And if
bitch.
there's a dispute, it's likely to be with a stranger whom you never saw before, and you never. The focus of the state is that the state has a monopoly on power. The last state government wants, the last thing that the British government wants, is if you have a dispute with your next door neighbor, you take it into your own hands and beat up or kill the next door neighbor. Instead, we have a system of justice in which the state takes that over, and so the state can say to you,
you have a pulse, and they have to respect you. And if you know what you are doing, you can end
you
this
have
war
no right and you have
on
no
drugs.
need to punish your neighbor because we're going to do that. But the state is concerned with right and wrong.
Because I guarantee the Arizona courts are just as fucking
And deterring
unprepared
and
as
punishing.
California's.
The state doesn't care at all about working out feelings between people who are strangers anyway. And any of you who've been involved in divorces or inheritance disputes,
But
either
banks,
in the UK or US,
banks
you know
just
that
think money, 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 pay, money, pay, money, pay. That's what I said to her. I
the
felt
court
it
system
coming out
here
like a bomb.
doesn't care at all about whether a divorcing husband and wife end up speaking to each other or whether a brother and sister in inheritance end up speaking to each other. Whereas in traditional societies such as New Guinea, if there's a dispute, It's with someone in your village or someone next door that you have to deal with. And so the focus is not on right and wrong. Who cares how much that pig was worth? Instead, the dispute is on the advantages of the two types of justice systems with a movie called Restorative Justice. In Restorative Justice, you bring together, if they're willing, the criminal and the victim of the crime so that they can see each other as human beings rather than as stereotypes. And there was for example, in California, I relate in my book the story of a woman whose husband was killed by an incautious driver. And the driver was sent to prison for 11 years. And naturally, the woman was all torn up and the murderer was torn up. But through restorative justice, the widow and the driver agreed that they would meet in prison under highly controlled circumstances, scripted, nobody can scream at each other. The woman spent a couple of hours telling the killer of her husband what it was like to get the news of her husband's death. Every day she thinks of her dead husband when she sees a bicycle that her husband was riding or hears music, what it meant to her daughter to lose her father. And so the killer got to see what he had done to another person. And then the killer began to relate his life history, that he had been badly abused by his parents as a child, that he had gotten addicted to pain-killing drugs, that he had broken his back, that the night before he had run out of the pain-killing drugs and his girlfriend had deserted him. The next day he went out and then he confessed to the woman something that he never confessed in the trial. I killed your husband intentionally because I was so angry with everything that had happened in my life. But for him it meant a discharge, for the woman it meant a discharge. And the woman afterwards, the widow afterwards, said, forgiving is difficult, but not forgiving is harder. And that is a way to bring together the advantages of the traditional justice system, which aims at emotional clearance.
So it seems like that kind of system can work in larger societies, that it needn't be adversarial as it is in England and the United States.
That's correct. And there are experiments going on to try to work out under what circumstances restorative justice works best. Should you do it at an early stage? Should you do it at a late stage? How should it be scripted, etc.?
And there are some people that don't feel guilt at all.
That restorative justice works only if both parties are willing.
Yes.
If either party is willing. It's tough if you're the widow. It's tough luck. You're not going to get clearance if your husband's murderer is unwilling to face you.
Você, moto mais você. Oh, você, e
swing between two extremes in our thinking about traditional cultures. At one extreme, many, particularly well-intentioned liberal people, idealize traditional cultures, think of them as being fonts of knowledge, peaceful, green, environmentalists, in tune with nature. And the opposite extreme is that more in the past, but still today, there are lots of people in the first world who look down on traditional people as primitive brutes and barbarians who should be pushed out of the way, dragged into the modern world, whether they like it or not, have nothing to teach us, and should, in the past, in fact, it was routine to kill them. They face the same problems that traditional people of their childhood and danger in old age. In many respects, they're similar to us. In other respects, they're very different from us. There are thousands of different experiments in how to operate a human society. Some of the things that they do are terrible. The Kalong people of traditionally Guinea, when a man died, his widow called upon her brothers and sons to strangle her. I do not recommend that. There are other terrible things in traditional society, a great deal. But there are also the wonderful things. Traditional knowledge, traditional culture is being lost, languages are being lost. The estimate is that the world is losing one language every 9 days, and at the rate we're going now, by the end of this century, the loss of languages, the loss of 7,000 languages, the loss of all these ways of bringing up children without spanking them, of ways of bringing up children so they're self-confident, of ways of getting value out of all people.
The modern way is a more efficient way of organising resources on the planet by having mass agriculture, mass trade, mass communication. Many people have benefited an awful lot from the modern world. You're not suggesting turning our back on it?
Absolutely not. I voted with my feet. I live in Los Angeles and I visit New Guinea. I don't live in New Guinea and visit Los Angeles. But there are big advantages to the modern world. We live longer, we have much more choice, we have medical care, we have education, we can travel and so on. But the fact that we have all those advantages, better ways of bringing up children, doesn't mean that we have clearer ways of thinking about danger and better ways of treating old people. There are things that we can learn from traditional societies while retaining the advantages of our modern society.
Well, can we have both? Or are we being driven into fitting into our allotted spaces in order
You're right. This is
the global society
crucial
to work as
and
efficiently
difficult
as
question.
It is
There are some things, some features of traditional life that we can easily adopt, something like 16 months old. So in traditional societies, babies are weaned until they're 3 or 4 years old. Well, if you are a woman college professor or a lawyer, it won't do to make a plea to the jury while you're breastfeeding your child. So there are some things that are difficult to incorporate into our modern life, but there are, and in traditional societies, it's common to it's routine to have the baby sleep in bed with the parents. There are many of us who would say, yes, I want my child to be independent, but I don't want my baby to sleep in bed with me.
Como vou lemar? Oh, my fé, isso tudo.